only a little intimidating. But, it's such a joy for me to be here. I send you greetings from both the Corazon Global in Tijuana, Mexico, and the Hilltop Center for Spiritual Living in Fallbrook, California. You probably don't know where Fallbrook is. So it is nodding, so I'm guessing everybody knows somebody who's in the witness protection program. Sort of how it goes there. But it's a privilege and a joy to be here, knowing that this platform has been occupied for so long with my spiritual brother, Reverend Josh, who I love dearly. And also, it was so good to see Reverend Peggy Price here this morning as well. And to know that you guys are in such amazing hands with Reverend Michael and Nicole, holding such a high consciousness. It was great to have them students. Where's Rick? Okay, there you are. You're next. So when I came here this morning, I saw that on your bulletin that the theme for the month is sanctuary, and how perfect that is. Reverend Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who was a great friend of Dr. Martin Luther King, he himself a theologian, a teacher, a mystic, said, "Words create worlds." Words create worlds. And what a powerful word, sanctuary, because first it is from Latin, sanctorium, a holy place, a sacred place. But it also means a place of refuge and safety. So a sacred place that gives refuge and safety. And what a beautiful vision for you to hold this time of year as we are moving into the holiday seasons. And then how we begin to expand that out into the world. So the title of my talk this morning is The Cynic and the Fool. And I'll play a little bit with that. But Reverend Terica Whitaker used to always say, never let a talk title get in the way of what you want to say. Because really what I want to talk about this morning are elephants, and Dante Alighieri, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Western mystics. So we'll kind of play in that way. So you may have noticed in the news, this was every week is so crazy, isn't it? But this week, so what were the things du jour? So there was what came out that first they were going to lift the ban on trophy hunting for big game, and what that looks like. And then there was, what's happening in Bonn at the climate change. And of course, all this information that's coming up with sexual harassment. Where do you even begin with all this? But I offer we start here. We start with this idea that comes from a man named Immanuel Lacan, who was a psychotherapist and a philosopher. And I'm kind of leveling it down a little bit, but essentially we come from this, which is when we hear something that we know is not true, when we hear ourselves saying something that we know is not true, is it coming from a cynic or a fool? So, I work alone. So, a fool can be forgiven because a fool gives information that they just don't know. They've either received misinformation or they've misperceived something, but a fool can easily be corrected by simply giving them more information. A cynic knows better, but also knows the power of manipulation. Now, of course, we see that collectively. When we hear things on the television, or we read things in the paper, or even from friends, or information that's coming from one place or another, we try to discern, is this coming from someone who doesn't know any better, or someone who knows better? But what I would also offer is coming from ourselves. Beliefs have a tendency to hide in other beliefs. We may think we believe something, but underneath that is something else altogether. And so we practice the art of discernment. What drives us? What drives us? So from the highest mystical point of view, I think in terms of St. Augustine, who said, "Our heart, you have made us in your image, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Isn't that beautiful? Because at the heart, at the essence of who we are, there is a longing, a desire to connect spiritually. But it's almost a little simplistic, because really what's at the heart of it all is desire itself. We are desiring creatures. Now, I think sometimes there is a false interpretation of Eastern religions that say that the goal is to remove all desire from our life. And what I know is that has been achieved never. Yeah. So it's how we work with this energy, where we go with this. So Dante Alighieri wrote this amazing mystical treatise called The Divine Comedy. And you know, it really is the story of the journey of the soul. Midway through life's journey, I strayed from the true path and found myself alone in a dark wood. Who hasn't been there before? Who hasn't woken up one day and realized that they have strayed from the true path and found themselves alone in a dark wood? I can do that before breakfast. But it speaks of something, and I think it's important to look at what Dante says in the perspective of it being a manual of the soul itself. Because when we deal with the soul, the language of the soul is art, it's metaphor, it's allegory, it's myth, it's music, it's art. My teacher used to say that the mind thinks through reason and the soul thinks through intuition. Now, what we appreciate about something like that is this, is that a myth tells a story. A metaphor gives us a vision of something. The only way we can talk about God is to context God within myth, within metaphor, within allegory. The minute that we try to make a myth real, it becomes a lie. So the minute we try to take Dante's story as an event, as a description of hell or heaven or purgatory, or as a theological treatise, we're missing the whole point. The point of it is a journey of the soul, so it's told in the language of the soul. And when we read it that way, it becomes relevant to us. And what is it that he says there? The essence of it is this: our desires shape us. What we desire shapes who we are. What we desire shapes our perception of things. Our perception creates our experience of things. So what we desire influences how we perceive, and how we perceive is what we experience in this life. So when I'm with my students, the first question that I ask is this, because it is the first question in metaphysics. What kind of universe do you live in? Is it an intelligent universe? Is it aware? Does it desire good? Is its impulse towards life? Or is it a static universe that is unconscious and random? Or it's a malefic universe that I have to watch out for, that is somewhat nihilistic. There is no future in nihilism. One person got that joke. I think it's terribly funny. My girlfriend looks at me like I'm the man who fell to earth when I use that joke. But what kind of universe do we live in? Because it sets the tone of our entire life, doesn't it? What Dr. Holmes says is how we perceive God is how we experience God. Thomas Troward said that Jesus was one of the greatest metaphysicians of all time because he taught us to perceive God not as a stern judge, but as a loving parent who desires to give us everything. So our first question that we ask then is this, is what kind of universe do I live in? Now, how we answer that collectively creates the community that we're in, a sanctuary. How that is experienced in the race mind creates the world that we're living in. And we feel the impact of it, don't we? Do you feel what I feel? That there is a low-grade anxiety that's happening. There's an unease of what's going on. There's a level of fear that we're all being exposed to. How do we deal with that? Especially as metaphysicians, how do we deal with that? Because in many ways, it's the work that we do. You know, in the creation stories in the book of Genesis, there are these wonderful stories about how God creates this and God creates that and sees the beauty and good of it and then creates humanity to be stewards of this beautiful planet that is absolute paradise. And we are invited to become the stewards, to awaken everything into it. St. Paul says in the book of Romans, he says that we, all creation, is predestined to express the Christ itself. In other words, all creation is awakening to its own Christ consciousness, to its own spiritual magnificence. And our work is to facilitate that. We're the ones that get to do that. But how do we do that? Because we know through fear it doesn't work. We know hostility is simply a way of deflecting thought and reason and intuition. Robert Sardillo, who is a spiritual psychologist and mystic in his own right, wrote a book called Freeing the Soul from Fear. And in that book, he talks about fear like a viral infection. Because we think we're afraid of things like tarantulas or spiders or snakes or, whatever it is, fill in the blank. And we kind of think if we take that thing away, we won't be afraid anymore. But the reality is, the thing we think we're afraid of is simply a way for us to project what's already in us onto something. Because you take that thing away, we're still afraid. It's still in there. And what he says is something very interesting. He says that when fear comes into us, the imagination flatlines. Because we go into survival mode. And in survival, there's no room for insight. In survival mode, we are falling back on what we already know. And for him, and the work that he does with people who have experienced traumas of one form or another, is to work in how we rekindle the imagination. Because that's where it's going to be. Again, going back to Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who says there are two ways of knowing. The first is reason. And reason is a way for us to access what we've already known and to put it into a context of experience. But the other way of knowing is through wonder, through awe, through surprise. Because when we allow ourselves to be surprised, when we move to a place of wonder and awe, there is where there's insight. there is where a new thought can emerge, a new perspective on things. And what we're knowing is what's needing to happen in the world today is a new imagination of things. So how do we activate that? How do we get into that? Well, what I know of all the spiritual teachers that I have read, of all the traditions and philosophies that I've spent time with, is all the great teachers have one thing in common. They point to nature as the greatest teacher. In fact, in the early mystical teachings of the Western world, it says that there are two sacred books. There is the sacred book which is known as Scripture, and there's the sacred book of nature. Nature, in her hidden resources and recesses, the things that she reveals. And so whether it's Jesus using stories of mustard seeds or gardens, or the Buddha himself talking about this, or the prophet, or whoever the great teacher is, they all talk about nature and going into nature. Because when we allow ourselves to be expressed, whether that be a walk on the beach, a sunset, a sunrise, hanging out with a four-legged or a winged, or gardening, or wherever it is, when we allow ourselves to be in that place of nature, something awakens within us, does it not? And we move to a place of wonder, of awe, surprise. And there some of our greatest insights go. One of the greatest teachers of nature in the Western tradition and the American tradition is the great American philosopher and poet. So I think personally, if America had a scripture, it would be Moby Dick. I'm serious about that. Highly mystical, highly mystical. If it has a prophet, it's Emerson. And Emerson wrote extensively about nature. And what he says is, God is not found in a book or a church. So Fallbrook. Seal Beach. Other than that, God is found in nature. And what does God say about nature? It's beautiful, it's good, it's where it all is. Emerson writes this. He says, "One look at the face of heaven and earth lays all petulance at rest and soothes us to wiser convictions." One immersion soothes the soul and opens us to wiser convictions. And what does the great teacher in nature teach us? Life. Change. Evolution is the principle. In fact, now as a ordained minister in the science of mind and spirit, I don't believe in the devil, but I've seen evil. And what I have come to believe is evil is the resistance to evolution. Because the law of evolution, the law of the universe is evolution. Moving, changing. And what is evolution? It is life, expanding itself, giving of itself, through itself, to itself, as itself. That's love. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was himself a mystic, a priest, a geologist, a paleontologist, and a mystic, and what else was he? All-around good guy, says that humanity is evolution becoming aware of itself. Humanity, you and I, we are how an intelligent universe is beginning to understand itself. But what he also said extensively is this: if we don't learn to love, we will perish. And so the work today is the work in love, beginning with our perception. What kind of universe? What kind of God do I love? Do I know? What are the beliefs within myself? And do they bring me to this place of love? What Teilhard would go on to say is this, he says, love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them, for it alone takes them and joins them into what is deepest in themselves. Love alone connects us because love alone brings us to that deepest recess within ourself. It awakens the soul. It stimulates the imagination. And it explains to us and allows us to participate in the greatest mystery of all, that everything is interconnected to everything else. And whether this is the teachings of a scientist or a mystic, what we all know is it's all connected, interconnected, one to the other, everything. Our work then is to create a new imagination. How we create that new imagination is to allow ourselves to be nurtured in nature. In nurturing in nature, it responds to us and awakens within us the capacity to expand and grow in love. There was a great mystic, St. Anthony the Great in the 3rd century, who said, I no longer fear God, but love God. For love casts out all fear. As we are moving forward, the power of love casts out all fear, unites us, and brings us into new insights of how we create sanctuary, holy sacredness, where all beings are safe. Elephants, Dante, Emerson, mystics. Thank you for your kind attention.